As I have previously laid out in these following 3 videos, double slit, quantum electrodynamics and Christian theism, quantum mechanics and consciousness, 5 experiments, Albert Einstein versus quantum mechanics in his own mind. As I have previously laid out in those 3 videos, the evidence for a theistic and/or a mind-first view of reality is very strongly supported by the experimental evidence that we now have in quantum mechanics. In this present video, I would like to further refine and expand on the argument that I had made in the Albert Einstein versus quantum mechanics and his own mind video, with more recent experimental evidence from quantum mechanics, and to thus further strengthen the case that the present experimental evidence that we now have from quantum mechanics strongly supports a mind-first and/or a theistic view of reality, and even when combined with other scientific evidences that we now have, strongly supports the Christian view of reality in particular. In order to accomplish this task, I must first define some properties of immaterial mind which are irreconcilable with reductive materialism. Dr. Michael Egnor, who is a neurosurgeon as well as a professor of neurosurgery at the State University of New York, states the 6 properties of immaterial mind that are irreconcilable with reductive materialism as such. Those 6 properties are intentionality, qualia, persistence of self-identity, restricted access, incorrigibility, and free will. You can read more in-depth definitions of each of the 6 properties of the immaterial mind in Dr. Egnor's article. Likewise, J. Warner Wallace has a very similar list, but not an exact match to Dr. Egnor's list of 6 properties of immaterial mind. For our purposes in this video of demonstrating that certain properties of our immaterial minds are irreconcilable with reductive materialism, and yet that some of those same properties are consistent with what we are now seeing in our present day experiments with quantum mechanics, I will focus on 3 primary, even defining attributes of the immaterial mind that were listed by Dr. Egnor. Those 3 defining attributes are qualia, persistence of self-identity through time, which may also be termed the experience of the now, and the mental attribute of free will, respectively. First off, we will examine the mental attribute of qualia, which many consider to be the centermost piece of our immaterial minds. An attribute which simply refuses to be reduced to any possible reductive materialistic explanation, and which also refuses to find any correlation with our present-day experiments in quantum mechanics. With the specific mental attribute of qualia, it is often pointed out to reductive materialists with what is termed the hard problem of consciousness that qualia, which it can be defined as the inner subjective conscious experience of exactly what something may feel or look like to us personally. It is often pointed out to reductive materialists that the attribute of qualia is forever beyond the scope of any possible materialistic explanation or to any possible physical examination for that matter. As Frank Jackson made clear in his philosophical argument Mary's Room, no amount of scientific or physical examination on Mary's part will ever reveal to Mary exactly what the inner subjective conscious experience of the color blue actually is, until Mary actually experienced what the color blue is for herself. Likewise, no amount of us knowing exactly what state a material brain may be in, whether it be by MRI, brain scans, or whatever instruments we choose to use, will ever be able to reveal to us exactly how something may feel or look like to someone else personally. As David Chalmers has pointed out with the philosophical zombie argument, for all we know, the person that we are talking to or examining with all our scientific instruments, for all we know, they could hypothetically be a philosophical zombie who has no inner subjective conscious experience whatsoever. And that the philosophical zombie that we may be examining may be just robotically giving us correct answers to our questions that seem appropriate. Reductive materialists simply do not have any realistic clue how anything material could ever generate the intersubjective conscious experience of qualia. Here are a few quotes by leading materialistic scientists and philosophers that make that point clear. As Professor of Psychology David Barash states in the following article, an article which happens to be entitled "The Hardest Problem in Science." But the hard problem of consciousness is so hard that I can't even imagine what kind of empirical findings would satisfactorily solve it. In fact, I don't even know what kind of discovery would get us to first base, not to mention a home run. In fact, the hard problem of consciousness is such a hard problem for reductive materialists to try to explain that many leading materialistic scientists and philosophers will often end up claiming that consciousness is just an illusion and it does not even exist at all. But the claim from many leading materialistic scientists and philosophers that consciousness is just an illusion is a blatantly self-refuting claim. It is the denial of the very thing that enables anything else to be real for us in the first place. As David Bentley Hart states, simply enough, you cannot suffer the illusion that you are conscious because illusions are possible only for conscious minds. This is so incandescently obvious that it is almost embarrassing to have to state it. And whereas consciousness in general and qualia specifically absolutely refuses to be reducible to any possible materialistic explanation and or to any possible physical examination, and also refuses to reveal itself to us in our present-day experiments with quantum mechanics. The other mental attributes that are listed from Dr. Egnor's list of persistence of self-identity through time, which I remind may also be termed the experience of the now, and of the mental attribute of free will, although those attributes are still irreconcilable with reductive materialism, nonetheless, both of those attributes of immaterial mind, unlike qualia, do make their present known to us in our present-day experiments from quantum mechanics. As to defining the specific mental attribute of persistence of self-identity through time and/or the experience of the now, it is first important to note that we each have a unique perspective of being outside of time. In fact, we each seemingly watch from some mysterious outside perspective of time as time seemingly passes us by. Simply put, we seem to be standing on an island of now as the river of time continually flows past us. In the following video, Dr. Suarez states that the irresolvable dilemma for reductive materialism is this: it is impossible for us to be persons experiencing now if we are nothing but particles flowing in space-time. Moreover, for us to refer to ourselves as persons, we cannot refer to space-time as the ultimate substratum upon which everything exists, but must refer to a person who is not bound by space-time. In other words, we must refer to God. In further defining the mental attribute of the experience of the now, in the following article, Stanley Jockey states that there can be no active mind without its sensing its existence in the moment called now. There is no physical parallel to the mind's ability to extend from its position in the momentary present to its past moments, or in its ability to imagine its future. The mind remains identical with itself while it lives through its momentary nows. And the experience of the now also happens to be exactly where Einstein himself got into trouble with leading philosophers of his day, and also happens to be exactly where Einstein eventually got into trouble with our present-day experiments with quantum mechanics. Around 1935, Einstein was asked by Rudolf Carnap, who was a famous philosopher of his day, "Can physics demonstrate the existence of the now in order to make the notion of now into a scientifically valid term?" Einstein's answer to him was categorical. The experience of the now cannot be turned into an object of physical measurement. It can never be a part of physics. And here's an article that goes into a little bit more detail of that specific encounter between Einstein and Rudolf Carnap. Prior to that encounter with Carnap, Einstein also had another disagreement with another famous philosopher named Henri Bergson over what the proper definition of time should be. Henri Bergson was very well versed in the experience of the now. In fact, that disagreement with Henri Bergson over what the proper definition of time should actually be was one of the primary reasons that Einstein failed to ever receive a Nobel Prize for his work on relativity. And here's an article that goes into a bit more detail about that confrontation between Einstein and Henri Bergson that led to Einstein failing to receive his Nobel Prize for relativity. The specific statement that Einstein made to Carnap on the train, that the experience of the now cannot be turned into an object of physical measurement, it can never be a part of physics, was a very interesting statement for Einstein to make, since the experience of the now has, from many recent experiments in quantum mechanics, established itself as very much being a defining part of our physical measurements. For instance, the following delayed choice experiment with atoms demonstrated that it proves that measurement is everything. At the quantum level, reality does not exist if you're not looking at it. Likewise, the following violation of what is termed Liggett's inequality stressed the quantum mechanical assertion that reality does not exist when we're not observing it. The mind-first and/or theistic implications of quantum experiments such as the preceding two that I listed are fairly obvious. As Professor Scott Aronson of MIT once joked, "Look, we all have fun ridiculing the creationists, but if we accept the usual picture of quantum mechanics, then in a certain sense, the situation is far worse. The world as you experience it might well not have existed 10 to the minus 43 seconds ago." Besides such experiments as these from quantum mechanics demonstrating that the experience of the now is very much a part of present-day physics, there is also what is known as the quantum Zeno effect, which also clearly demonstrates that the experience of the now is very much a part of present-day quantum physics. An older entry in Wikipedia described the quantum Zeno effect as such: an unstable particle, if observed continuously, will never decay. Likewise, the present-day entry on Wikipedia about the quantum Zeno effect also provocatively states that a system can't change while you are watching it. And here is a fairly recent experiment which verified the quantum Zeno effect. Atoms won't move while you watch. Atheist materialists or reductive materialists have tried to get around the quantum Zeno effect by postulating that interactions with the environment are sufficient to explain the quantum Zeno effect. Yet, the following interaction-free measurement of the quantum Zeno effect demonstrated that the presence of the quantum Zeno effect can be detected without interacting with a single atom. Thus, the quantum Zeno effect, regardless of how reductive materialists may feel about it, is experimentally shown to be a real effect that is not reducible to any possible materialistic explanation. And thus the original Wikipedia statement of an unstable particle, if observed continuously, will never decay, stands as being a true statement to make. Moreover, on top of that, the mental attribute of the experience of the now is also verified by recent experiments in quantum mechanics that have shown that entropy is always dependent on the observer. As the following article states, the deletion of data under certain conditions can create a cooling effect instead of generating heat. The cooling effect appears when the strange quantum phenomena of entanglement is invoked. In the new paper, the researchers show that when the bits to be deleted are quantum mechanically entangled with the state of an observer, then the observer could even withdraw heat from the system while deleting the bits. Entanglement links the observer's state to that of the computer in such a way that they know more about the memory than is possible in classical physics. In measuring entropy, one should bear in mind that the object does not have a certain amount of entropy per se. Instead, an object's entropy is always dependent on the observer. Applied to the example of deleting data, this means that if two individuals delete data in a memory and one has more knowledge of this data, she perceives the memory to have a lower entropy and can then delete the memory using less energy. As well, in the following 2010 experimental realization of the Maxwell-Demon thought experiment, it was demonstrated that knowledge of a particle's location and/or knowledge of its position turns information into energy. And as this following more recent 2017 article stated, James Clerk Maxwell said, the idea of dissipation of energy depends on the extent of our knowledge. And the author goes on to state, quantum information theory describes the spread of information through quantum systems. 15 years ago, we thought of entropy as a property of a thermodynamic system. Now, in quantum information theory, we wouldn't say entropy is a property of a system, but a property of an observer who describes a system. Again, to repeat that last sentence, we wouldn't say entropy is a property of a system, but a property of an observer who describes a system. Think about that last statement for a second. The reason why I am very impressed with these preceding experiments demonstrating that the experience of the now is very much a part of entropy is that the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, is very foundational to any definition of time that we may have. For instance, the following article states, entropy explains time. It explains every possible action in the universe. Even gravity can be expressed as a consequence of the law of entropy. On top of the fact that entropy explains time, it explains every possible action in the universe, entropy is also, by a very wide margin, the most finely tuned of all the initial conditions of the creation of the universe. Finely tuned to an almost incomprehensible degree of precision. As Roger Penrose himself stated, this now tells us how precise the Creator's aim must have been, namely to an accuracy of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd power. This is a huge number. In the following video, Dr. Bruce Gordon touches upon just how enormous that number truly is. Dr. Gordon states, you would need 100 million, trillion universes our size with a 0 on every proton and neutron in all of those universes just to write out this number. That is how fine-tuned the initial entropy of our universe is. In fact, entropy is also the primary reasons why our own material temporal bodies grow old and eventually die in this universe. And yet, to repeat the last sentence from the quantum information paper that I cited, we wouldn't say entropy is a property of a system, but a property of an observer who describes a system. That statement is simply fascinating. Why in blue blazes should the finely tuned entropic actions of the universe, entropic actions which happen to explain time itself, even care that if I am consciously observing them, unless the experience of the now really is more foundational to reality than the finely tuned 1 in 10 to the 10 to the 1/23rd entropy of the universe is. To state the obvious, this finding of entropy being a property of an observer who describes a system is very friendly to the mind first and or to the theistic view of reality. For instance, in the Bible, in Romans chapter 8, verses 20 and 21, we find that for the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. At this time, I would like to take a small detour in my video and examine the theistic implications for molecular biology in particular. In investigating the theistic implications, first off, it's important to note, as the following video lays out, that there are many lines of evidence that clearly show that the bottom-up reductive materialistic framework of Darwinian evolution is found to be grossly inadequate for explaining how any particular living organism might achieve its basic form and or shape. The failure of reductive materialism to be able to give an adequate account for the basic form of any particular living organism occurs at a very low level, much lower than at DNA itself, and therefore biological form of any living organism cannot be reducible to random mutations in DNA as Darwinists presuppose. In the following article entitled Quantum Physics Problem Proved Unsolvable, Gödel and Turing Enter Quantum Physics, which studied the derivation of macroscopic properties from a complete microscopic description, the researchers remarked that even a perfect and complete description of the microscopic properties of a material is not enough to predict its macroscopic behavior. The researchers further commented that their findings challenge the reductionist point of view, as the insurmountable difficulty lies precisely in the derivation of macroscopic properties from a microscopic description. Moreover, as the following video highlights, there's now found to be a massive amount of non-local, that is to say beyond space and time, quantum entanglement and or quantum information within the molecular biology of all living organisms. Moreover, due to there being a massive amount of quantum entanglement and or quantum information within molecular biology, it is now known that there is far less random thermodynamic jostling within living organisms than was originally presupposed by Darwinists within their reductive materialistic framework. As Jim Al-Khalili states in the following video, living matter seems to behave in its order and its structure just like inanimate matter cooled down to near absolute zero. More importantly, since quantum information is physically conserved and can therefore not be created nor destroyed, then finding non-local quantum information within molecular biology on such a massive scale gives us fairly compelling evidence for a transcendent soul that is capable of living past the death of our material bodies. As Stuart Hameroff states in the following video, quantum information isn't destroyed. It can't be destroyed. It's possible that this quantum information can exist outside the body, perhaps indefinitely as a soul. On top of all that, it is now known that what is termed positional information of any particular organism is not reducible to the sequential information that is encoded on DNA, as was originally presupposed by Darwinists. At about the 41-minute mark of the following video, Dr. Jonathan Wells, using a branch of mathematics called category theory, demonstrates that during embryological development, positional information must somehow be added to the developing embryo from the outside by some non-material method in order to explain the transdifferentiation of cells into their multiple different states during embryological development. The amount of positional information that is somehow coming into a developing embryo from the outside by some non-material method is immense, vastly outstripping by many orders of magnitude the amount of sequential information that is encoded on DNA. As Doug Axe states in the following video, there are a quadrillion neural connections in the human brain. That is vastly more neural connections in the human brain than there are bits of information in the human genome. So there's got to be something else going on that makes us what we are. And as the following article states, the information to build a human infant atom by atom would take up the equivalent of enough thumb drives to fill the Titanic, multiplied by 2,000. As to how thermodynamics itself relates to this immense amount of positional information, work done on bacteria can give us a small glimpse into just how far out of thermodynamic equilibrium multicellular organisms actually are. The information content that is found to be in a simple one-cell bacterium, when working from the thermodynamic perspective, is found to be around 10 to the 12 bits, which is equivalent to around 100 million pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica. In comparison, the largest libraries in the world have about 10 million volumes, or about 10 to the 12 bits. Thus, since bacteria cells are about 10 times smaller than most plant and animal cells, and since there are conservatively estimated to be around 30 trillion cells in the average human body, then That gives us a rough ballpark estimate of around 300 trillion times 100 million pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica, or about 300 trillion times the information content contained within all the books of the largest libraries in the world. Needless to say, that is a massive amount of positional information that is somehow coming into a developing embryo from the outside by some non-material method. Moreover, this positional information is also ultimately responsible for constraining our adult human bodies to be so far out of thermodynamic equilibrium precisely for a lifetime, as Stephen Talbot states in the following article. Virtually the same collection of molecules exist in the canine cells during the moments immediately before and after death, but after the fateful transition, code, information, and communication in their biological sense will have disappeared from the scientist's vocabulary. The question, rather, is why things don't fall completely apart, as they do, in fact, at the moment of death. What power holds off that moment precisely for a lifetime and not a moment longer? Moreover, this positional information that is somehow coming into the developing embryo from the outside by some non-material method, and that is also constraining organisms to be so far out of thermodynamic equilibrium, is also now found to be optimal. As the following recent 2019 article states, it is now known that some form of positional information makes genes variously switch on and off throughout the embryo, giving cells distinct identities based on their location. When the researchers have been able to appropriately determine what cells are doing, many have been surprised to see clear indications of optimization. Optimal is not just some word that they're carelessly tossing around in the preceding article. When they describe a biological system as being in an optimal state, they mean exactly what they're saying. As the following article states, in each instance, biophysicists have calculated that the system could get faster, more sensitive, or more efficient without first relocating to an alternate universe with alternate physical constants. Moreover, as the following article states, there are a surprisingly limited number of ways a network could be constructed to perform perfect adaptation. Moreover, the amazing and surprising outcome of the study is applicable to any living organism or biochemical network of any size. Thus, to sum up what we have thus far, positional information is somehow coming into the developing embryo from the outside by some non-material method, and this positional information is also constraining the living organisms to be out of thermodynamic equilibrium for precisely a lifetime. As well, this positional information is also now shown to be optimal. On top of all that, and most importantly, this positional information that is constraining our bodies to be so far out of thermodynamic equilibrium for precisely a lifetime is now also shown to be according to recent advances in quantum information theory that I highlighted earlier in this video, is now shown to be a property of an observer who describes a system. In other words, some outside observer who is outside the space-time of the universe itself is now required in order to give us an adequate causal account so as to explain how it is even possible for this immense amount of positional information to somehow be coming into a developing embryo from the outside by some non-material method. Christian theism just so happens to give us an adequate causal account for exactly who this outside observer might be who is imparting this vast amount of positional information into developing embryos. As Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13 states, "And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give account." And as Psalms 139, 13 and 14 states, "For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." Well, I apologize for this little detour into biology that I have taken in this video, but considering the overall implications for Christian theism and for the intelligent design versus Darwinism debate in particular, I consider the detour into biology a rather important one for us to have taken. But anyways, now let's get back to the main task of this video, which is showing how the mental attribute of the experience of the now and how the mental attribute of free will, how those attributes correlate with recent experimental findings from quantum mechanics. Besides the quantum Zeno effect, quantum information theory, and the recent experimental realization of the Maxwell's Demon thought experiment, all confirming that the mental attribute of the experience of the now is very much a part of present-day quantum physics. Quantum mechanics also now shows that Stanley Jockey's contention that there is no physical parallel to the mind's ability to extend from its position in the momentary present to its past moments or in its ability to imagine its future is also confirmed by recent experimental breakthroughs in quantum mechanics. As to the ability of the mind to extend from its experience of the now to past moments in time, in particular, in recent experiments in quantum mechanics, it is now found that quantum mechanics can even mimic an influence of future actions on past events. As the following 2017 article stated, "A decision made in the present can influence something in the past." And to drive this point further home, in the following 2018 article, Professor Correlate provocatively stated this: "Entanglement can occur across two quantum systems that never coexisted. It implies that the measurement carried out by your eye upon starlight falling through your telescope this winter somehow dictated the polarity of photons more than 9 billion years old." It is also very interesting to point out that these experiments demonstrating quantum entanglement in time are very friendly to Dr. Michael Agnor's theistic contention via Aristotle that perception at a distance is no more inconceivable than action at a distance. And it is also interesting to note that this finding of quantum entanglement in time also refutes Dr. Vincent Torley's strenuous objection against Dr. Agnor. Dr. Torley strenuously objected that perception cannot possibly occur at a distance, since a supernova that we might be observing ceased to exist nearly 200 millennia ago, long before the dawn of human civilization. Yet, despite Dr. Torley's strenuous objection against Dr. Agnor's claim that perception at a distance is no more inconceivable than action at a distance, and to repeat Professor Kroll's provocative statement, the findings of quantum entanglement in time implies that the measurements carried out by your eye upon starlight falling through your telescope this winter somehow dictated the polarity of photons more than 9 billion years old. In further confirmation of Stanley Jockey's contention that there is no physical parallel to the mind's ability to extend from its position in the momentary present to its past moments, or in its ability to imagine its future, in further confirmation of that contention, not only does quantum mechanics show us that a decision made in the present can influence something in the past, but quantum mechanics also shows us that our present conscious choices ultimately determine what type of future will be presented to us in our measurements. As leading experimentalist Anton Zeilinger states in the following video, what we perceive as reality now depends on our earlier decision what to measure, which is a very, very deep message about the nature of reality and our part in the whole universe. We are not just passive observers. As well, with contextuality, we also find that in the quantum world, the property that you discover through measurement is not the property the system actually had prior to the measurement process. What you observe necessarily depends on how you carried out the observation. Thus, Stanley Jockey's contention that there's no physical parallel to the mind's ability to extend from its position in the momentary present to its past moments, or in its ability to imagine its future, is now experimentally established as being true by the fact that a decision can be made in the present that can influence something in the past, and is also established by the fact that we are not just passive observers. What we perceive as reality now depends on our earlier decisions what to measure. Thus, to sum up this section of this video up, recent experiments in quantum mechanics, contrary to what Einstein himself thought was possible for experimental physics, have now shown in overwhelming fashion that the experience of the now is very much a part of experimental physics. In fact, due to these advances in quantum mechanics, it would now be much more appropriate to rephrase Einstein's answer to the philosopher Rudolf Carnap in this way. It is impossible for the experience of the now to ever be divorced from physical measurement. It will always be a part of physics. Besides Einstein possibly believing that the experience of the now cannot be turned into an object of physical measurement, it can never be a part of physics, Einstein also possibly believed that he did not have the mental attribute of free will. It is difficult for me to see how a genius of Einstein's caliber could fall for the logically self-refuting fallacy of denying his own free will. Here are a few references that clearly illustrate the self-refuting logical fallacy that is inherent when anyone tries to deny the reality of their very own free will. Despite Einstein's logically self-refuting belief that he had no free will, recent experimental evidence from quantum mechanics itself now also falsifies Einstein's belief that he had no free will. As Steven Weinberg, who is an atheist himself, states in the following article, in the instrumentalist approach in quantum mechanics, humans are brought into the laws of nature at the most fundamental level. The instrumentalist approach turns its back on the vision that became possible after Darwin of a world governed by impersonal physical laws that control human behavior along with everything else. In quantum mechanics, these probabilities do not exist until people choose what to measure. Unlike the case of classical physics, a choice must be made. In fact, Steven Weinberg, again, who is an atheist, rejected the instrumentalist approach precisely because humans are brought into the laws at the most fundamental level, and also because it undermined the Darwinian worldview from within. Yet, regardless of how he and other atheists may prefer the world to behave, quantum mechanics itself could care less how atheists or anyone else prefer the world to behave. For instance, in this recent 2019 experimental realization of the Wigner-Friends thought experiment, it established that measurement results must be understood relative to the observer who performed the measurement. Moreover, although there have been several major loopholes in quantum mechanics over the past several decades that atheists have tried to appeal to in order to try to avoid the spooky theistic implications of quantum mechanics, over the past several years, each of those major loopholes have each been closed one by one. The last major loophole that was left to be closed was the setting independence loophole, and more provocatively, it is known as the free will loophole. Yet now, Anton Zeilinger and company have recently, as of 2018, pushed the free will loophole all the way back to 7.8 billion years ago, thereby firmly establishing the common sense fact that the free will choices of the experimenter in the quantum experiments are truly free and are not determined by any possible causal influences from the past for at least the last 7.8 billion years, and that the experiments therefore themselves are shown to be truly free to choose whatever measurement settings in the experiments that they may so desire to choose. And now, here is another recent interesting experiment by Anton Zeilinger and about 70 other researchers that ensured the complete independence of the measurement settings in a Bell test by using the free will choices of 100,000 human participants instead of having a super fast quantum randomizer determine the measurement settings, as was usually done in these quantum experiments. Thus, in conclusion, regardless of how Steven Weinberg and other atheists may prefer the universe to behave, with the closing of the last remaining major free will loophole in quantum mechanics, humans are indeed brought into the laws of nature at their most fundamental level, and thus these recent findings from quantum mechanics directly undermine, as Weinberg himself pointed out, the vision that became possible after Darwin of a world governed by impersonal physical laws that control human behavior along with everything else. Moreover, allowing free will and/or agent causality, that is, as it is more properly known, back into laws of physics at their most fundamental level has some fairly profound implications. First off, allowing the agent causality of God back into physics, as the Christian founders themselves of modern science originally envisioned, and as quantum mechanics itself now empirically demands with the closing of the free will loophole, rightly allowing the agent causality of God back into physics provides us with a very plausible resolution to the much sought after theory of everything, and that Christ's resurrection from the dead provides an empirically backed reconciliation via the Shroud of Turin between quantum mechanics and general relativity into the much sought after theory of everything. Here are a few posts where I lay out and defend some of the evidence for that claim. For instance, to give us a small glimpse of the power that was involved in Christ's resurrection from the dead, the following article stated it would take 34,000 billion watts of BUV radiations to make the image on the shroud. This output of electromagnetic energy remains beyond human technology. Besides the empirical verification of free will and/or agent causality within quantum theory, bringing that rather startling solution to the much sought after theory of everything, there is, to put it mildly, also another fairly drastic implication for individual people being brought into the laws of nature at their most fundamental level as well. Although free will is often thought of as allowing someone to choose between a veritable infinity of options, in a theistic view of reality, that veritable infinity of options all boil down to just two options: eternal life with God or eternal life without God. As C.S. Lewis stated, there are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will be done." All that are in hell chose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. And to support C.S. Lewis's contention that without that self-choice, there could be no hell, all I have to do is to point to all the many people of today who are fanatically pro-choice of all things, as far as abortion is concerned, demanding the unrestricted right to choose death for their unborn babies, no matter what stage of development their babies may be at. Unbelievably, infanticide itself, unthinkable in our society just a few short years ago, is now being demanded as a right by many people on the so-called pro-choice side. On top of that, in order to support the actual physical reality of heaven and hell, I can appeal directly to two of our most powerful and precisely tested theories ever in the history of science. I can appeal to both special relativity and to general relativity respectfully. As the following video shows, with general relativity, we find an infinitely destructive eternity associated with it. On the other hand, with special relativity, we find an extremely orderly eternity associated with it. Again, the implications for individual humans, to put it mildly, are fairly drastic. To get the seriousness of this across, I offer the following testimonies from people who have had a near-death experience and who have personally gone to heaven and who have gone to hell. To put the drastic implications for us even more clearly, we, with either our acceptance or rejection of God and what He has done for us through Jesus Christ's atoning sacrifice on the cross for our sins, are choosing between eternal life with God or eternal death separated from God. Because of such dire consequences for each of our eternal souls, I plead with any atheist who may be watching this video to seriously reconsider their refusal to accept God and to now choose God, even choose eternal life with God, instead of choosing eternal death separated from God. Not to sound cliche or anything like that, but this decision to either choose God or to reject God is by far the single most important decision that you will ever make in your entire life. Well, that's the end of the video. I would like to thank you all you people very much for watching this video, and again, all videos and references that I have cited in this video may be accessed in the link that I have provided in the video description. Thanks again very much for watching.